Hi guys, Josha here from ultimatepokercoaching.com, and today I'm going to be looking at some hands that I played recently and just taking a look at how I might go about studying these hands, or how we might look at hands together during a coaching session. So I guess my first tip for studying is to make sure you're picking situations that occur frequently. So although it might be kind of fun to study, maybe a check raise on the river or something like that, it's not going to occur often enough to make it sort of worth your while to study. So I'd recommend really focusing on spots that happen all the time. So today I've got one pre-flop spot and another spot where we play in position against the big blind. So there are two situations that occur, all the time. So this first spot, we get an open and the button flats, and I go for the all-in here for 37 big blinds. So I'm going to use HRC to take a look at, if this is profitable, and then, I don't just want to look at this situation sort of in a vacuum. I want to play around with the ranges a little bit and see how my strategy might adjust versus different player types. So I've input just some GTO ranges to start with. So we have the opener opening this range, and the guy on the button is flatting this range, which are from GTO. And against that, we are going to be jamming all the hands in green, and the original raiser is going to be calling something like this, and the guy on the button is going to be calling something like this. So you can see here 10-9 suited is making a little bit of money. It's not amazing, but whenever you're formulating your strategy, you also want to be looking at how this decision compares to like your alternative. So flatting 10-9 suited here isn't so appealing because we're often going to be playing out of position to 3 people, and our hand is going to be dominated by everybody. So whenever we hit a flush or a straight or 2 pairs and all the money goes in, we're often going to be dominated by better hands, like better flushes, better 2 pairs. If the board comes 10-9x, on an 8, a jack, a queen, a king, an ace, everybody is going to have straights and better 2 pairs and sets in their ranges. So I don't think we're going to have a very easy time post flop. And even if the board just comes 10 high, playing out of position to 3 people is not going to be very fun. So just taking a profitable shove with a hand like 10-9 suited, I think, is a reasonably good idea. Whereas a hand like pocket 6s or pocket 5s that is effectively break even as a shove, it's actually going to play much, much easier as a call, because we're either going to hit the set or not. And once we hit the set, we're usually going to be good to play for stacks. So let's just play around a little bit with these ranges. And remember, we're shoving almost 40 big blinds, around 40 big blinds. So, I don't think the original raiser is going to call 40 big blinds, probably with like king, queen, ace, jack, probably not, maybe not pocket 8s. So just going to take a couple of hands out of the calling range. And same for this guy. I think 7s and 8s is not going to be thrilled having to call. Maybe he'll call some ace-jack suited. So like the first guy has to obviously worry about the guy behind, but this guy's closing the action, so maybe he'll flick in a hand like ace-jack suited. So I'm just going to run that and see if it affects our jamming range at all. Okay, I'm back, and we have a huge difference here. So before we were jamming 10.5% of hands, and just by taking those couple of hands out of the calling ranges, you can see now we're jamming 41% of hands, and 10-9 suited is absolutely printing. So this is going to be a really profitable jam, and you can see pairs perform really well. So every pair is absolutely printing. Ace-X suited is absolutely printing, and then these sort of suited connected hands are also doing really well. So the next thing I want to look at is, maybe we're playing against a more recreational player, and so maybe he's flatting more offsuit hands. And remember, offsuit hands are going to be more combinations. So there's going to be 4 combinations of every suited hand and 12 of every offsuit hand. So once you see somebody starting to play too many offsuit hands, their range is very quickly going to become too wide. So this is, as an example of how we might adjust our range against a more recreational player. So let's put all these hands in, something like this maybe. And we want to be fair, so if they're a more passive player, maybe they're flatting some strong hands as well at a higher frequency. Something like this maybe. Okay, so let's run this and see what the result is. Okay, so what I did here is not only add some calls into his flatting range on the button, but given that he's more of a splashy player, I also allowed him to call hands like pocket 8s, pocket 7s, ace-jack suited. And so when this happens, because he's calling more hands, our jamming range now actually decreased a little bit. This is a good experiment to see which hands are basically always going to be profitable shoves, and you can see the pairs ace-X suited and again the suited connected hands are still performing very well. And although these pairs are going to be good calls, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to make more than like 1 big blind, 1.5 big blinds, playing out position to 2 or 3 people. Effectively, we're only going to be playing the hand when we hit a set, and even then we don't necessarily get the stack because the opponent would have to have a strong hand as well. So I think like these win rates are sort of too good to pass up, I would say. Maybe I'd call pocket 2s, that's not performing so well. But yeah, these hands are doing very well. So let's move on to the other hand, which is a post-flop spot. Okay, so here we open in early position and face a call from the big blind. We go ahead and c-bet, and the turn is kind of a brick. And we went for the overbet here. The big blind calls, and then we decided to triple barrel this hand for an all-in sizing on the river. So whenever I'm studying, I want to, before I go in and look at the solvers and really go in depth into the spot, I want to make sure I know what I want to find out from this study. So my main questions here would be, so I went for the overbet on the turn. So is overbet, a good sizing in this situation? And what about my hand selection? Like, is ace-4 of diamonds a hand that wants to bluff a lot, or would I rather bluff a different type of hand? And then on the river, same thing. What kind of sizings do we want to use, and which hands make good bluffs? And then I also don't just want to be copying the solver or trying to copy the solver. Obviously, if I could copy the solver, that would be pretty nice. I don't want to be trying to emulate the solver. I want to be finding out like what drives the strategy and why might the solver want to do certain things. And then further to that, I want to look at not only my strategy, but look at the opponent's strategy and see if it looks realistic. And if it doesn't, then how could I go about exploiting that? So let's have a look at the solution. So the opponent checks, and You can see right away here, I went for a small sizing, but this is not necessarily preferred. So the solver likes to go for a big sizing here. And the reason for that, I would say, is because we just have such an equity advantage here. This is absolutely huge. We've opened from early position and we're against a really wide big blind range. So having 64% equity, we really just want to pile a lot of money into the pot in this situation. And you can see especially like our overpairs really want to go big. And then our sort of bluffs, are the lowest hands in our range, also really want to go big to generate fold equity. And then hands that don't mind going small are these sort of middling hands that kind of want to put some money in, but we don't want to be putting a ton of money in with like pocket nines. And with our exact hand, ace-4, it kind of mixes. So obviously small bet is fine. So we're going to look at that node because that's what I did. The turn is not the 7 of diamonds, I think it's the 7 of clubs. Yep, 7 of clubs. And so first thing we can see is that the overbet is the preferred sizing. So this is about 40%, this is 80%, and this is 150% of the pot. So clearly the overbet is the preferred sizing. So we want to be thinking about why is that? Why do we want to overbet here? So let's go back to the flop. As we said, we have a huge range advantage here. We have 64% equity, which means we're going to be betting our entire range. So 100% of our hands are going to be betting. However, our position is going to be folding a lot here due to our range advantage. So when we bet small, we're just targeting, all of the opponent's air hands that just have to fold. Even though they're getting a great price, they're just complete trash hands, so they're folding. So once they've called, obviously they're only calling hands that have some sort of decent equity in the pot. And so once we go to the turn, we can see the equity is kind of neutralized. We no longer have a range advantage here because we've c-bet our whole range, so we've taken our whole range to the turn, whereas our position has only continued with sort of decent hands. So the reason we might want to overbet here is due to the way the equity is distributed. So here, this is the out of position range. You can see this 50% equity is largely coming from hands around, 50%. There's a few super low equity hands, but most hands are doing okay. There's not many super high equity hands. Most hands are kind of middling, like 60%, 70%, this kind of range of equity. Whereas in position, we have these super low equity hands, like 20% equity hands, and then we have really, really high equity hands, like 80% plus with our strongest queens and overpairs and sets and such hands like that. So the way we now want to leverage our equity is we don't want to be betting our whole range. So we're doing a lot of checking, and then we want to polarize our range. So we're going to bet the very strongest hands, and we're going to bet the very weakest hands. And by doing this, we are going to make out of position's middle equity hands indifferent. So let's take a look at the strategy just to verify that. Yeah, so we're betting the very strongest hands, and then these hands like ace-4, ace-3, ace-2, which we saw are the really, really low equity hands. And then a hand like pocket tens, which is a more middling equity hand, we're just checking that. So we're going polar with the very strongest and the very weakest hands. And we can see our position's response now. And whenever a hand is mixing two options, so here it's mixing call and fold, that means that the EV of calling is basically the same as fold. So apart from the clubs, obviously, because that's got flush draw. So a hand like Jack 8 of hearts is making, -4, which is essentially 0. A hand like King Jack is making, 0, 0, between 0 and 10 chips out of 375 chip pot. So, they're effectively 0. And, these are pretty good hands. So these are hands with good equity in the pot. But what we're doing by using this overbet strategy is turning these decent hands into 0 EV calls. You can see even a hand like, say, Queen 6 of diamonds, very, very low EV call, even though it has really good equity in the pot. Okay, so we're going for the overbet, and our position is going to be calling something like this. Again, thinking exploitatively, I think the opponent could fold some hands like Jack 6 of diamonds for sure, Jack 4 of diamonds, Jack 4 of hearts. Maybe we'll see some folds from some weak Queen X as well. So I think the opponent could definitely overfold here, which would mean we would want to bluff more, of course. But even versus the optimal solution, Ace 4 of diamonds kind of likes going for a big bet. Okay, so they call, and then the river is 6 of diamonds. Opposition checks. And our strategy is mixing between an all-in overbet. So the pot is 600, so like a 2x overbet, or a sort of 80% type sizing. So when we're trying to pick our bluffs, we want to basically unblock the opponent's folds. So for example, a hand like clubs, if we have Ace X of clubs or King X of clubs, we just want to give up with that hand because we want the opponent to have those types of hands that are going to automatically fold. So we'd much rather have a hand like diamonds, because then the opponent can have, Ace X of clubs more often, which is going to be a fold. Then thinking exploitatively, let's take a look at how the opponent is supposed to respond versus an all-in. So remember, we've gone for a c-bet, then we've gone for an overbet on turn, and now we're going for a 2x overbet again on the river. And the opponent is supposed to call hands like Queen 9 off, Queen 8 off. You can see even some jacks like Jack 6 of course is calling, and then these hands like Jack 2s, they're very low frequency, but when you add them all up, they can amount to a decent overfold. So what I've done here is I've done what's called node locking on this strategy. So if we look at the original, the opponent is calling 33% of the time with this range. And all I've done is force him to call slightly less, so only 4% less. And I just had him fold these types of really weak hands. I actually upped the calling frequency with Ace Queen and King Queen. So I just have him pure calling those. Of course, we could see those hands fold. I think that's kind of realistic, but I want to be a little bit pessimistic when I'm node locking so that I can look at the worst case scenario. And then if my bluff is good versus the worst case, then in reality, it's going to be, even better. So essentially he's calling King Queen plus, of course he's calling 2 pairs and sets, and then he's just going to fold everything else, which is just a 4% overfold, remember. Let's take a look at what we were doing versus this. So this is versus the 33% optimal call, and we were betting 24% of the time with an overbet. Once he starts to overfold, we are now betting 72% of the time for an overbet, and these hands are just pure overbetting. So this shows that if the opponent just makes a couple of folds too much, then we start to really ramp up the aggression and bluff kind of crazily. So I think overall my line is pretty good, and versus the population, I think it's going to be very profitable. So this is kind of how I'd go through my hands. So first of all, I want to be looking at the GTO mechanics of how the situation is kind of working from the solver's point of view, and then I'm going to go in and see if the opponent deviates in some kind of way. How can I go ahead and exploit that? All right, so I'm going to leave that here, and please get in touch if you have any questions or if you're interested in some sessions together. And good luck at the tables.